Yeah. So sports have like, I've been an athlete my whole life. Even the ones that just kind of amateurs do, there's a concept of an off season where it's like, okay, it's winter in most of the country right now, so nobody's going to be training for triathlons, and it makes the whole thing cyclical in a way that I think is very human and realistic, honestly, in terms of how it fits with our lives. Should we just not? Should we just have all of December off from work?
I live in Berlin, so I would take December, January, maybe even February. It's very cold, it's very dark, it's very gray. I would go somewhere else on an island, somewhere sunny. So I would take that off. And also in advertising, January is a slow month sometimes, right? People are shuffling their budgets. So I mean, if I had a choice, I might, I might as well.
Unquestionably on my side.
Hey everybody, this is the Data Driven Marketer, sponsored by NetWise. I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
And I'm Ionut.
Welcome back for another hang in the data basement. Thanks for joining us. And special thanks to our guest this week, Ionut, as you heard, whose last name I've been advised not to even try to pronounce. If you want to go ahead and do it, which I can appreciate as one with a last name that is never pronounced properly. So
it's Ciobotaru.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm totally not going to try. Good call, sir. Ionut is the Co-CEO of Verve, which is a privacy-first omni-channel marketing platform, I believe. Did I get that right? Omni-channel, multi-channel. We could maybe even talk about the difference on the podcast. Mm-hmm. Anyway, thank you for joining us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Verve and how you ended up there? Running the show.
Yeah, thanks. It's been quite a ride. So Verve Group is part of MGI, which is Media and Games Invest, which is a listed company both in Germany and Stockholm, Nasdaq Premier. And I actually joined through the acquisition of my company, PubNative, a mobile SSP, a few years ago. And yeah, since then we've been, let's say, executing on the build and buy strategy that our group has, and acquiring assets, basically building blocks that we put together towards our vision, which is to what you mentioned, privacy first and omni-channel. So what we're trying to achieve is create an integrated, vertically integrated ad tech stack from the demand side with the DSP, with the DMP, and the SSP, of course, but also an omni-channel stack. So horizontally expand across mobile, web, and connected TV. We believe that that's how the future is going to look like in a world with less identifiers in each of the channels, where you actually need to look holistically, both for, let's say, upper funnel metrics, lower funnel metrics. And again, to your point, in terms of privacy first, that's I would say core to our value prop, in the sense that if you look at what happens with the cookies, what happens with the IDFA, there are constraints both on the regulatory side and platform side that brands and consumers need to navigate, because I live in Europe and we have pop-ups. It's basically pop-up heaven now. Every website you open every day. I don't know how many pop-ups I consent to, but it's probably more than I see ads, I would say. So I think the cure was worse than the disease, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I mean, we deal with it in the States as well, because the easiest answer is just put it everywhere. Like a lot of companies in the US, the default is now just follow the EU rules, because that's the easiest. Like you just jump through the right hoop and you never have to answer the questions that you're worried about.
Yeah, but I don't think that was the right approach, and now everyone is following it.
No,
but nobody's questioning it, right? Yeah. It's like, why is that? Is that the right way? I do believe in privacy, and I do believe consumers should have a choice, and we should not spread the data, and should encrypt it, keep it on device, or not store it if it's not needed, right? So consumers' choice should be first. Agreed. But then how you implement and how do you think about the rest of the ecosystem? The execution was not there in terms of GDPR. I was there when it happened, 2018, and we had to rebuild infrastructure and everything. And then, US is copying it, and now other countries, right? Even Brazil, I think even China is doing it. But I think people should take a step back. Even Europe now is considering, hey, we hurt small businesses and independent companies, and we gave more powers to the walled gardens, Facebook and Google's, right? So now they're taking a step back. I think UK first, but Well, after 2 years, thank you very much.
So I would love to dig in a little bit to just the word privacy, because when that's sort of been the catch-all term for everything that's going on, but I think it actually encapsulates a whole bunch of other stuff. Like, for instance, a bunch of the things you just listed are actually transparency, right? It was a big part of it, and there's a lot of other stuff that's kind of rolled up in there. What is in that concept for you, both from sort of the business side or the publisher side, and then from a consumer side or a buyer side, right, who's interacting with all this stuff?
So the way you actually nailed it with transparency, I think that's where it starts, and it definitely starts with the consumer. It's a consumer first approach, and from my point of view, the consumer only understands what he sees right now. So if you're an advertiser, you're a Nike, and you ask for the email address, they will understand. Hey, I need it for communication. I need to send you the bill. I need you to store data and personalize the experience or offer a more rich experience, right? So first party data on the advertiser side. Same on the publisher. Either you're an app or you're a broadcaster or you're a publisher, news publisher. They would understand it once you go on the on the website and you establish that one-to-one communication. So I think it starts with transparency. I'm not a strong believer in third-party data and broadcasting first-party data. Well, first-party data across different third parties, 100 third parties in some examples. If we look at what's happening right now in the ecosystem, I do believe in the second party, right? When you have first party and another first party, and then you match it in a clean room, and that's encrypted and safe. That's also fine as long as there's no leakage between the parts. So I do think it starts with transparency, and I do think it starts with the consumer. And there are other parts to privacy is which parts of the data should never be shared. Actually, should probably not even be stored in a certain way. So there are sensitive let's say, data categories that should never be stored, sent, even first party, maybe it should be encrypted by default. And I'm not talking passwords, but I'm talking other sensitive information, right? Like medical data and things like this. Then what is tracking, right? Because everyone interprets tracking as a subset of privacy, and everyone makes their own interpretation of that, from the EU government to Apple. That's another question. I don't have a precise answer, but I can say there's more questions than answers.
That's a little bit the direction I was going to take it, which is almost like, I think we're probably on the same page regarding the privacy measures that should exist. But Brian likes to throw a thought experiment at me whenever we talk about it, which is mainly to say, well, why do we care though? Like one step above what is privacy and sort of everything you outlined, like when we talk about defending privacy or caring about privacy, like why? It's a very visceral thing. There's a reason it's part of Apple's like ad campaigns right now, right? Like, what are we talking about? You know?
I think there are two parts.
Does that?
Actually, at first, I think it's a very, very good question. I think it's a very, very good question, and I think it has two answers. And one of the answers is a question. And I would start with the question. And how many times has, let's say, a cookie ID or even IDFA has been used for bad purposes and is known and got in the media? I don't really know that many cases. There was an experiment in France following Macron and things like this, but I haven't seen it being used for so many nefarious purposes as is now portrayed in the media, right? Everyone, let's remove the cookies. It's tracking people across websites, and they're going to see the same ad 3 times, right? It is not as easy as people think to actually track users and for nefarious purpose. That's one part. So that's the question. Is it really that bad? That's the question. And now the first answer is, I think as people, and I think when we think about our rights, we think of intimacy and privacy. We don't want to share. There's certain information we want to share and certain information we want to keep to ourselves, even towards our personal lives and our circle of friends. That's natural to us. And now we look at that from that perspective, right? And of course, Apple as a brand taps into that part, but ignoring the second part, which is, hey, is it really that bad? Did something that bad happen on the Apple platform with the IDFA? No, people were just selling ads. Businesses were thriving on Facebook and other ad networks. People were downloading games. I mean, it's hard to see the bad or the evil in that, right? And they are tapping. So they are tapping the first two let's say, benefit themselves or position themselves closer to users. Because if you think about to consumers, right? If you think about the brand, you actually tap into emotional states, right? Not necessarily rational data points. And privacy was left alone, I would say, by a few by the other tech players, and they saw the niche. And at the same time, now they started an ad business, right? So it's just like win-win-win for them. Yeah, smart move. What can I say?
Yeah, I tend to think of privacy. The things that really end up mattering, I think, are transparency and control. Because ultimately, privacy is really complicated. And that the question Adam just asked, why do we care or who cares? It's different for everybody, and it's different at different times, right? Like I care differently about different types of information, and I care differently at like different times of the week, depending on the moment, right? Like sometimes I'm happy to see ads or happy to have my information get used by a business to do something. Other times I want one thing shut off. There's certain information I don't want to share, like you said, medical information, right?
Yeah.
I feel very private about. I just feel exposed, right? Maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe everyone else in the world doesn't. But if I have the option to control it, I know what's going on and I have some control. That feels like it's really starting to touch on the solution to what's going on here. And that those two seem to be the areas that we as the business operators and the technologists can really touch and where kind of the dials should be. Whereas privacy is such an abstract concept. It's so broad. I feel like it sort of cheapens the conversation, especially in the media, right? The public discourse about it.
What I wanted to add there is that both transparency and control can be put on what I would look at as an identity gradient, where sometimes you just have context and it's real time and it disappears when it's not valuable anymore. Sometimes you have storage that you keep the data because it's fine and it will help you further. Sometimes you don't even have neither and it's fully anonymized because in some parts you should not have access to data, or the control says, the user says, I don't want to give that part of my data away. So yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. And we could have a lever for the consumer to choose where it wants to be, maybe across different channels, right? You can choose your privacy settings on the mobile device, on your TV, and on your PC, maybe in the browser, and broadcast those privacy settings across both publishers and advertisers, supply and demand side. And then they of course should have the right to inform you better. Hey, I need this because of that, and that's a proper value exchange. Actually, in mobile, that has been the case, not for, let's say, privacy-related topics, but for notification or maybe location. You would only get it as an app if there was a use case to use it, right? So if you're no other app, you need it. But if you're a game, which is not Pokemon Go, then you don't need it. But if it's Pokemon Go, then you do need it, right? So,
good example.
Yeah.
The thing I think is interesting when you start to talk about the challenge of you put it really well, like future proofing the ad agency or the like the advertising industry. A lot of this stuff isn't new if you look to other aspects of even the same industries. Because when you talk about, like, you look at how much entertainment is supported by ads, network television, all that kind of stuff. All the intellectual property tied up in those entertainment things has all kinds of weird publishing control clauses. There's whole companies called publishers that control all these annoying levers, and it's what entertainment lawyers fight about. And like the idea of a sunset clause, you're allowed to use this song in your piece of television for this amount of time, and I'm going to get 90% of the royalty for the first 2 years. Then I'm going to get 75% for the next 2 years, then 60% for the next few years. Like, we're just explaining the decay of a royalty curve, essentially. We already do that stuff. We just keep it all in spreadsheets. And so there's no, it's I don't want to say it's trivial, but like the technology exists now, I think, to put that a layer higher where we can say, look, you can have my email address while I'm signed into the thing. We re-up monthly, so we're good. But as soon as we stop, here's the decay curve on your ability to keep that information, and then it gets yoinked.
Along the lines of what you said earlier, you notice that the technology was stood up in the ecosystem as it exists right now, and it enabled us to build these really complex systems. And 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago, we didn't have the technology to track all that stuff, right? A lot of that was invented to enable modern marketing, right? It's insane if you see behind the curtain the amount of information going between systems and the real timeness of the processing and bidding systems. It's some of the most advanced software and system architecture that we've created as humankind, right? It's like on the scale of the electrical grid, but in computers, right?
Correct.
It's insane communication. So we have a chance now to lean on that technology to reimagine all of it, which we didn't have at the beginning. It honestly was maybe too complicated to think through all of this stuff then, right? You'd have to invent too many things at once.
Yeah, exactly. At that point we were not ready. We didn't have the scale of data, not the scale of compute, not AI and machine learning was not really a thing 10, 20 years ago, right? Because you didn't have the compute, you didn't have the internet speeds, you didn't have the amounts of data we have. But now we do have those. So actually we're in the right spot to reinvent or go back a bit in the past and fix it now. To Adam's point though, I don't think it's actually so much of a technology challenge because we've learned and we know how to solve a lot of these things. I think it's more of a how do you say, getting the consumers on board, getting how do you say, consensus between the parties, advertiser, ad tech players, publishers, and so on. So I think it's more of an industry rally rather than a technology problem. Because to your point, we solved some of the hardest tech challenges that we have solved as a humankind in advertising in the current ecosystem. So now I think we need to solve a bit for other challenges.
It's a business and cultural problem now.
Right.
Exactly.
Right?
I was going to ask, at the head of a startup in the space, I'm curious how much resistance you run into to the idea that the tech exists. Because my experience of like raising money in the tech space has very often been, let me explain to you why this thing that you've been hearing about once every 10 years for the last 30 years actually works now, right? And it's like, part of it is for sure like a dog and pony show of things that I know scientists have been talking about since the 80s. But like, we really are on an accelerating curve. Like, new stuff exists every year to try to solve problems we've been trying to solve forever. I wonder how much this is one where, as you get out there, you're still getting the people that are just going, yeah, I just don't buy that this is fixable still. Which is
I actually,
a common,
so we've built
it's commonly what jams up business progress, I think, because institutions, they hew toward what they know.
Yeah.
Well,
I have a counterpoint to that. So we've been building Atom, which is anonymized targeting on mobile devices, which is our own device audience generation solution, which takes inputs from the device itself, from the app, and from the ads, so contextual information, runs a machine learning model on that, and then outputs a probabilistic segment, right? The age, gender, and whatever other interests you have based on what you've been doing with your phone, which apps you've been using, and where you've been moving, right? And we've talked to quite a few advertisers and brands as well as publishers. Actually, we've seen quite good traction. So I've been on the startup side and I've been an entrepreneur. And actually, this project, I work myself with the mobile team and the data science team. And the conversation shifted. People are open to hear and test because they understand that this challenge is coming. Now, we were one of the first to bring this to the market, so I guess we need a few more to make the move. But I think it's moving in the right direction. I'm seeing other companies, even one in Europe, ID5, which they also have a solution more for the web than on mobile. But and I see them gaining traction. So I'm seeing, actually, it's a fertile ground now for startups and new ideas. That's what I would say, which was not as much the case before. Maybe ad tech and advertising and marketing were not as hot, 10 years ago or 15 when I started. But now I think people understand more and they're willing to test more. That's my view currently, but I've been a bit out of the startup world since I sold my company, obviously.
right.
But I've been delivering new products.
Yeah. Well, I'll say as a technologist, that makes me happy. But ultimately, I'm it makes me wonder if in the data space, the trend we're going to increasingly start to see is companies coming out of Europe where the laws are tighter around this stuff, like just getting acquired into the bigger players that, because, partially they're all trying to, we talked about this on our cookieless episodes. There are a lot of different players trying to solve this problem at once, but Europe is the only place where there's legitimate pressure that already exists to implement a solution like immediately because the regulations are tighter. That feels like the right kind of pressure to get the type of innovation where you're sort of like, oh yeah, that is the answer. And we never would have thought of it while we were trying to use the old methods, sort of still, because our giant company, actually, that's kind of what wish would happen,
I do think so. I mean, I think innovation is born out of constraints, right? Like we discussed about Steve Jobs. So I have 3 devices. What do I do? Put them all in my pocket. And you have the constraints. Okay, can I make it one? And then they make a great one. So I do think you have a point there. And I would say there's been a resurgence, I hope that's the word, of ad tech companies in Europe post GDPR. While GDPR hit us all hard, I would say, we all had to adapt, right, or disappear. And I think, it's been like a cleansing fire, you could say.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what regulations that are coming and what the shift you're seeing in the industry. What new, wonderful, innovative aspects will emerge from this? Because there's always a lot of talk around how do we fix kind of what feels broken or unfair or invasive, right? How do we fix the privacy issues? How do we fix my information being passed around? But like, what will also come from cleaning that up? What's enabled that's really exciting? What makes advertising more interesting or better or more compelling? What maybe can sit on top of this infrastructure that makes the web better and apps better and smartphones more engaging? What else do you see there?
So if you ask me, I think, and it's something that would come on top, would be a common control mechanism, maybe even a protocol such as OpenRTB that you can control your privacy settings across all apps, all channels, everywhere, right? Not just on Google and Facebook, which have their own parts, but you should have your own control across your digital footprint, across the web or open internet, or call it as you may. So I would really hope for that to happen. I don't know where that would sit. Maybe that could be something decentralized, but I don't want to give too much fuel for Adam. But I think that's one thing that I'm looking forward to. The other part is how we're looking more into first party data, right? Both on the demand and the supply, and being much more careful about that and cognizant, and having that conversation with the consumer. We already see some things, but I think there's much more to be done there to enable first party data to be more valuable, to be worked on. So I'd say those are the 2 points that I'm excited on.
So I always have a reaction as I start to think about the world compressing back to a place where first party data is really the only data that people are using, which I conceptually I like that, right? I also there's an aspect to like everyone's data getting passed around and sold, and you can like buy more data places. Something doesn't feel right about that, but from like a technology perspective, everyone having to manage the same information about me, right? Like a million publishers across the world all needing to engage with me and get my data and store it and process it. It's really inefficient. So then I go back to like, okay, so now we need like a centralized third party authority. And I kind of get lost in this loop. I'm like, well, that doesn't feel right either. And then you also made the comment that you're not sure where something like OpenRTB would sit. And I think you meant like physically in like the technology stack of the industry. Like, how do we get that there? And I don't know what my question is, but I get lost in this loop of like, that's not right. Wait, that's not right either. Funny thing.
I can't not take the blockchain bait at this point. That's the reason that you feel that way is why people like me are excited about blockchain, because there's aspects of how to do that maybe make that the most promising like solution to that problem in 20 years. That's all I'll say, unless anybody wants to go any deeper.
Yeah, no, I think those are the right questions to ask. Yeah, that's what I would add.
Keep it on the rails.
If you had to, the short version of why it makes a difference is because blockchain lets digital private property exist, which I say that way very deliberately because I mean it's literally the same root of the word, right? We have ideas of like ownership around physical things that are easy to conceptualize because you keep them in your house and you lock your door and they belong to you. Data is a thing that if you don't let it flow out there, you can't get the benefit back of sharing that information in the same way. And so it's historically just been binary. It's either private or it's not, sort of.
Yeah.
Right? Like the laws try to do things like HIPAA that create some special use cases, but like mostly there's no in between right now.
And we're also, this is another interesting aspect of this. I think our personal data, like the kind of data about me that's used to sell ad space to me or to sell ad space to someone who wants to advertise to me, it's not worth enough to me for an economic incentive to really matter to me personally, but in aggregate to publishers and to companies who are advertising, it does fit in the economic model of the world where there isn't an economic incentive. And so we can't fix that without more granular economic incentives, which again is another plug for potential crypto being plugged in here, blockchain, right? But
potentially,
and that's a big problem,
though,
right?
I think economic incentives are what drives the world, right? So if we solve it through economic incentives, those two challenges you mentioned about 1 million publishers owning the data and reselling data on third parties. I think we need to find economic incentives to make the system work. Now I do have another challenge on that is about data ownership. And let's say Brian posts the pictures and Adam, you like it. Who owns the data, right? Well, the picture is obviously Brian, but the like, is it yours? Is it Brian's? Who does that part? So,
right.
Yeah, I do think we're early. So I think we're asking the questions. I don't think at least I don't have yet the answers, but we're starting to work on those challenges.
So, to kind of take it back to the beginning when you were introducing the Verve Group, you mentioned, I think, that you're building sort of a unified system, right? You've got a DMP, a DSP, and an SSP, right? So you're kind of spanning the whole gamut of the tech. And to me, what I think immediately there is you own kind of the whole transaction all the way from the consumer, all the way up to the consumer doing something that triggers ad space, all the way back to through the publisher to the advertiser, and then back to the consumer again in a way. So is your strategy there? Is the point there kind of you have more control to make change? Like you kind of control a whole ecosystem there with that?
Correct. It works much faster this way. The feedback loop, right? Like if I want to test something on the publisher space, then I need the data side to fit, let's say, a certain audience, and then I need to sell that to an advertiser. I can do that internally, and it takes us a call or it takes us I don't know, an email. When you talk to a third party, there's their roadmap, another quarter, and things like this. So it takes too much time to learn and iterate. And we believe that that's the more efficient way. Now, the other part is cost, right? If you need to pay every fee all the time on each of the third parties, it's going to cost you more to activate media or buy better or get ROAS, right? So we try to decrease the cost and increase efficiency. That's kind of the thesis there. That's why we have that part. We do work whenever needed. We actually do work not whenever needed, but I would say we work with all the third parties in the ecosystem. So we see ourselves, we call an open garden. So we have all of these things in-house, but we work with all the other major DSPs because we believe in an open market. So everyone should choose their tools, both their DMP, their SSP, and their DSP of choice. This has been built in-house because that's our thesis. That's what we believe in, but we do work with all the other major players out there. Again, I think we see ourselves as an actor in the open ecosystem. So again, open protocols, even our SDK is open source. So and transparent pricing. So I think that's
I love it. I love that vision. It's very complete.
So as a place to wrap it up, so we can get out of here on time, I'm curious. I can't remember if you mentioned it or if it's just the thing I saw when we were prepping for the episode, but you have a background in psychology, academically, and I'm always interested when you find someone in a position like you or even me or Brian are in. Well, Brian was an engineer, so it makes sense that he's still an engineer. I studied philosophy, and now I'm, off in this completely different space of data and storytelling and marketing and whatever. Like, I wonder how much I'm curious how do you feel about the impact of that sort of mentality that comes from studying something that's a little squishier than like hard data necessarily, right? Like, it's a lot of just talking about feelings and then trying to align them with patterns. And, my wife is a psychologist, so we talk about this a lot. And it's always funny because we just hit a point where it's sort of like, well, yep, that was an interesting study, but still just talking about human brains and feelings and stuff here. So who knows?
Great point. That's a great point. I don't think psychology as a science is yet there with let's say, physics or chemistry or things along those lines. But what it does is actually goes deeper into the human being and emotions. And I think we're mostly driven by that, right? We don't read studies and we act on that, or sometimes we do, but I think we're human beings. We like to be amongst other people, and we take decisions based on the people around us and our emotions and feelings, right? And if you look at what advertising tries to do, right, it tries to influence a bit those emotions and get you to buy certain things that you need, hopefully that you need, and that you are looking for, rather than things you don't actually need. So it's not that unrelated. In the end, it's working with people, working with yourself, and well, I would say advertising it's broadcasting that or multiplying that, or scaling that, right?
Right. Well, like we were talking about it before, and the data points that we're talking about when we talk about privacy and ownership are literally using or described with verbs that we use that are feelings. Oh, I liked this thing, right? Like, we're literally quantifying and turning into data this thing that, like, before Facebook would have just been, I wear a Pearl Jam t-shirt and now you know that I'm into the same band that you're into, and we just traded this human interaction that's sort of
data was exchanged.
Of course it all gets weird once we start to quantify this stuff. Because, like,
Correct.
we're really bad at it as humans. So we need artists and stuff so it's,
we need artists to create that data. And I think as an individual, we are unique, but as a group, we start having similar desires and similar actions. And I think that's what advertising does, look at groups and group behavior and acts upon that. So we can, let's say, keep our individuality, but still leverage tech for scale somehow.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks we're pretty much out of time. So I'll say thank you for joining us, especially you told us beforehand that you're on holiday in Colombia. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you both. I really enjoyed it.
Where, if people want to learn more about Verve or what you're up to, where can people find you?
Verve.com and IC@verve.com. That's the easiest way.
Awesome. Great. Well, this has been another episode of The Data Driven Marketer. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I'm Adam.
I'm Brian.
I'm Ionut.
Take it easy, everybody.
Oh, also, you can find us at Data Driven Pod on Twitter. I got to get better at those end plugs for the people that stuck around.
You got to plug us too sometimes.